Good morning. I'm Steve Hindy. I'm one of the founders of Families for Safe Streets, along with Amy Cohen. And we're a group of New Yorkers who have lost loved ones in traffic crashes over the last few years. We just, on Sunday, had our third anniversary party at my house in Gowanus, and there were more than 50 people there. It's a very brave bunch of people advocating for safe streets, and I'm very proud to be here to introduce Mayor de Blasio, who has become a champion of Vision Zero in New York City, and his vision for Vision Zero is moving all around the country and around the world, and we're very proud to be part of that effort. I think he's going to announce some terrific improvements for the coming year, making our streets safer for pedestrians and bicyclists and motorists. I got here early and I was standing out by the federal courthouse there, and there were like 6 or 8 foreigners who came by and said, "The Brooklyn Bridge, where is it?" And I said, well, it's right over there. You have to go around that barricade and walk up that way. But that's long been a problem here in Brooklyn, people walking across the bridge and getting here and facing this maze of very intimidating traffic. So I hope the mayor is going to be addressing that. And thank you all for coming, and I'm going to turn it over to Mayor Bill de Blasio. Thanks.
Thank you, Steve. And I want to start by saying that all of the folks who put together Families for Safe Streets, they did their work as a labor of love. Folks who lost their loved ones, lost their children, lost their spouses, lost dear family members to crashes that didn't have to happen. They have continued to carry on the spirit of their loved ones through this good work. And they have often taken the work to Albany to fight for the changes we need in the law to save more lives. So I want to just thank everyone associated with Families for Safe Streets. Their work has been outstanding, and it is now more necessary than ever. Now, I want to remind everyone, Vision Zero is work that continues to build. This is a very audacious concept. Even calling it Vision Zero was audacious, but when you listen to the stories of families who have lost loved ones, it makes a lot of sense why the goal is to end all crashes, and it makes sense that we have to do things very differently. So we understood that Vision Zero had to be aggressive. It meant a lot more enforcement by the NYPD, by the TLC, to stop speeding, to stop failure to yield, to stop the kinds of things that were putting lives in danger. It meant redesigned traffic patterns, new traffic islands, and other key features like we're going to talk about today that make the situation safer for pedestrians and cyclists. It meant more speed cameras and signals to keep everyone safe. All these things had to happen together and had to keep growing and growing and growing. That's the concept of Vision Zero. And we know it's working. We have now 3 years to look at, and we see constant progress. As I've said before, we've only just begun. Each year under Vision Zero has been safer than the one before. I think that's the kind of evidence we need to know a policy is working. Last year, 2016, we had the fewest traffic fatalities in the recorded history of New York City. But again, we're not satisfied. We have a lot more work to do. Now, this year to date, up to this point in March, we see a 20% reduction in traffic fatalities from the same period last year. 20% fewer fatalities than the same point last year. And that really makes clear why this approach is so necessary. But the fact that there's fewer fatalities is not good enough, because every life lost is one too many. So we now have a lot more work to do, and it starts right now. We're now on the second day of spring, and that means construction can begin, a whole new season of construction to make our streets safer. And we're beginning work on dozens of new Vision Zero projects right now. It's part of a $1.6 billion investment in safety and infrastructure improvements over the next 5 years. I want to thank all those who have been part of this work. You'll hear from several in a moment, but I want to thank someone up front who, he and his agency do a lot of the crucial work, but they often don't get a lot of the praise. I want to thank Dr. Fenyoski Peña Mora, the Commissioner of the Department of Design and Construction. Thank you to you and all of your team for the great work you do. And I mentioned before the advocates who have had such a big impact on Vision Zero, helping us to build it, helping us to get the laws we need so it can grow. In addition to Families for Safe Streets, I want to thank Transportation Alternatives and the Tri-State Transportation Campaign for all they have done. Now look, our friends at the Department of Transportation, they look forward to this week in the year so they can get to work. The rest of us are just happy the spring is here, but from a DOT perspective, it means time to get to work and time to change the city and make it better. They will be doing major improvements in all 5 boroughs. You'll see new crosswalks, wider sidewalks, more protected bike lanes. And here at the foot of the Brooklyn Bridge, just a little ways over, you see one of the biggest and busiest intersections in all of Brooklyn that needed a lot of work. The history of this intersection is not a good one. Heavily trafficked, historically too dangerous. So the new construction is going to lead to a series of major improvements: widened sidewalks, additional bike paths, a new expanded median to accommodate bikers and walkers. This one's going to have a big impact right away, but it's just one of dozens of projects, and they will be all over the city, from Mott Haven to Marine Park, every borough. That's the physical part of the work, but we also know the enforcement work not only has to keep going, the enforcement work has to grow, and the NYPD has been rising to the occasion. There have been 17% more speeding violations given year to date than in the same period last year. And when you compare speeding violations from 2014 to present, they are up 67%. Failure to yield enforcement, that didn't get enough attention in the past. Well, it's up 29% year to date. And again, since 2014, it has more than doubled. So we're going hard at these 2 areas where so much of the problem exists. NYPD is making its presence felt, and I want to let all New Yorkers know, all drivers know, the NYPD is currently in the midst of a speeding enforcement blitz. So I want everyone to realize, if you speed, the NYPD will get you. Everything we're doing is to protect life. But meanwhile, everything we're doing is being threatened by the news that we received last week from Washington. President Trump's proposed budget would cut funding for Vision Zero. Now, to give you a sense of magnitude, the federal government has supported Vision Zero projects since 2014 to the tune of about $100 million. Think about that, $100 million. That's a lot of intersections and crosswalks and improvements to our city. But now, President Trump, who ran on a platform of fixing infrastructure, is literally going to take money away from infrastructure work and away from public safety. And we're going to fight those cuts. We're going to fight them alongside our congressional delegation led by Senators Schumer and Gillibrand. And we will be working with mayors and leaders all over the country to stop these kind of cuts that will take away from the safety of our cities. We just need to see this in human terms. That money we are losing from Washington, if the president's budget goes through, that money means that fewer lives will be saved. It's as simple as that. And we are in the life-saving business here in New York City, so we're going to fight those cuts every step of the way, and I think we're going to find a lot of people around the country who will join that fight, and a lot of family members, like the good folks here, who will join together all over the country to put a human face on what these cuts mean. Just a few words in Spanish. Nuestro programa Visión Cero está salvando vidas. Esta primavera vamos a mejorar vías y añadir nuevos cruces peatonales y carriles para bicicletas en cada condado. Vamos a seguir trabajando para mejorar la seguridad vial de todos los neoyorquinos. With that, it's my pleasure to bring up the woman who, she and her team are leading the way on all these improvements all over the city, our Transportation Commissioner, Polly Trottenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I actually just want to give a lot of thanks here today. Thank you for your leadership and the incredible resources that you have provided for us to do the work. And I have to say, you're right, it's an exciting day. It doesn't quite feel like spring yet, but it's true. We are going to be breaking ground on, I have to say, a really exciting roster of projects all over the city, all 5 boroughs, and we are very excited about finishing up phase 1 of our Tillary Street work. As someone who now bikes to work regularly and goes over the Brooklyn Bridge, this is going to be a tremendous connection for cyclists and pedestrians and making that whole intersection safer. So I want to thank you, Mr. Mayor, thank my partners at DDC, NYPD, TLC. I want to thank the advocacy community. You're the wind at our back. You help us every step of the way in these incredible projects and this incredible Vision Zero work. I will actually be up in Albany tonight and looking forward to the next phase of talking about what we can do up in the state level to continue to make our streets safer, perhaps expanding our speed camera program and some of the other initiatives that as you've mentioned, Mr. Mayor, have helped us buck the national trend and see fatalities go down in this city by 23% over the last 3 years, where on the national trend, it's gone up 14%. So thank you.
Thank you, Polly. Polly was quicker than I expected. Hold on. Polly, you are a picture of brevity. All right. Next, I would like to bring up a man who's done tremendous work, and as I mentioned, NYPD has been leading the way on enforcement, and enforcement has a very powerful public education element to it. People realize that when they speed, there will be consequences, and that's part of the reason that Vision Zero is working, because those consequences have been made increasingly clear by the NYPD and TLC and others. So it's my pleasure to introduce the Transportation Chief for the NYPD, Tom Chan.
Good morning. First and foremost, I'd like to thank Mayor de Blasio and our Vision Zero Task Force for their support, especially DOT Commissioner Trottenberg and TLC Commissioner Yoshi, all our elected officials, and particularly the chair of the Transportation Committee, Yadanis Rodriguez. Vision Zero, our mission is to prevent serious collisions and fatalities continues. After 3 years, we see much progress, yet there is much more to be done. All along, it's been a 3-pronged process and an approach: education, engineering, and enforcement. We thank the mayor for his support, the enforcement aspect by equipping our officers with the proper gear, such as LiDAR equipment for speeds, dash cameras for our highway patrol autos, much needed variable message signs to alert the public on safety issues, and also hiring additional traffic enforcement agents to assist in the movement of traffic throughout the city. Going forward, our officers will continue to target priority corridors and intersections. The advice that I like to give to all New York City motorists is the same that I would give to my own friends and family, including my 2 sons who currently possess learner's permits. Obey all traffic regulations. Please slow down and pay extra attention at intersections for our pedestrians. By making your turns slower and at a slower rate, both left and right turns, we can dramatically reduce injuries and fatalities to our pedestrians. As of this week, the NYPD speeding enforcement is up 17% year to date, up 67% since 2014. And failure to yield enforcement is up 29% year to date, and up 104% since 2014. A citywide pedestrian initiative was recently conducted on Monday, March the 6th through Sunday, March the 12th. 1,915 failure to yield summonses were issued, an increase of 121% compared to the same period last year. 12,088 Vision Zero summonses were issued. A total of 17,000 summonses were issued for the initiative period. NYPD has done utilized personnel and has a speed enforcement initiative currently underway, started yesterday, March the 20th through March the 26th. NYPD is also planning 2 additional initiatives in the month of April. So again, it's very important, and my message to the public is to please slow down, pay attention, and use good judgment when we're entering intersections. Yield to our pedestrians because they are quite often the most vulnerable people on our city streets, including our bicyclists. Thank you very much.
Finally, I want to bring up 3 very strong voices for Vision Zero and for safety all over our communities. First, our public advocate, Tish James.
So, Mr. Mayor, when you said this was the second day of spring, the reporters, they just shrugged and said, really? First, I want to thank the mayor, Mayor de Blasio, Commissioner Polly Trottenberg, Commissioner Peña-Mora. I want to thank the borough president of the Great Borough of Brooklyn, Eric Adams, Councilmember Rodriguez, Chief Chan, and I see in the back the president of City Tech, President Holzer. Nice to see you. As most of you know, my district, when I was in the member of the City Council, started on J Street. And so I know a little bit about this area. And so it's unfortunate that we have this organization called Families for Safe Lives, for Safe Streets. I want to thank Steve Hendy and I want to thank Amy Cohen for being here and for all of the advocates, because no person or child should lose their life when they are legally crossing our streets or safely walking on a sidewalk. And thanks to Vision Zero, we've seen a drastic reduction in these types of fatal crashes. But there are still people losing their lives, which is why street redesign is so critical. We know that more accessible crosswalks, wider sidewalks, pedestrian medians and protected bike lanes and cameras and speed limits are life-saving tools. And today we are standing at one of the most dangerous areas in Brooklyn where tourists and pedestrians and government workers and automobiles and students, there's thousands of students on this campus where they all intersect. And that is where we've embarked upon construction, which is taking place in major corridors in all 5 boroughs. Right here on Flatbush Avenue, and East Fordham Road in the Bronx, Woodhaven Boulevard in Queens, 5th Avenue in Manhattan, and Victory Boulevard in Staten Island, just to name a few. Corridors which unfortunately are more defined by the number of crashes than they are by their utility. And every time a pedestrian is injured or killed, we are painfully reminded that we are not yet at zero. And as ghost bikes remind us, they serve as a symbol of our moral responsibility, of our duty to do everything in our power to end pedestrian fatalities and to protect all New Yorkers. And that is why efforts like this are so critical. And these construction efforts will save lives. And so now this is really a warning to all of you drivers. You have been forewarned. Slow down. Yield to pedestrians. Avoid crashes. Make sure you look to your left and you look to your right. Remember that life is precious. And so the warning has gone out. And I just want to thank the mayor, and I want to thank all of you here today, and I particularly want to thank NYPD to let everyone know that it's time that we share the road, and that we share the road with individuals such as me, mature individuals like me who don't ride a bike, but I'm a walker, and sometimes I walk across the street, and to navigate when you come off that bridge is really intimidating. And I'm so glad that we're now going to have the construction so I'll have a safe place to traverse. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Now, the Borough President of Brooklyn, Eric Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I want to really thank both Amy and Steve, who took pain and turned it into purpose as they continued to ensure that other family members didn't lose their loved ones. I remember prior to meeting Steve, after his son was killed on the Manhattan Bridge, we went out as a rider on the Manhattan Bridge. I went out and really called for changes on how we view pedestrian and bike riders. I like to say I'm the only borough president in the history of Brooklyn that, number one, ride a bike, and number two, take the public transportation system. So I clearly understand how important our roadways are. I'm also concerned that for every 100 miles of highway, those who are in economically challenging areas are 3 times more likely to be killed by vehicle fatalities. Safety cannot be determined by the economic boundaries of zip codes. We must ensure that the entire city, black and brown children, don't want to lose their life to pedestrian accidents. Previous administrations did not invest inside those communities. This mayor gets it. This mayor has moved to do so. Bike lanes are just as attractive in Brownsville as it is attractive in Burham Hill. All communities must be safe. Skateboarders, bike riders, walkers, pedestrians, elders who are crossing streets. We invested in Cross Brooklyn to widen or decrease the amount of roadway that is needed to cross those dangerous walkways. And so this is a combined effort. The dollars we use on the borough level, the dollars that are used on the city council level, and the dollars on the city level, all together is one mission: to ensure that pedestrian accidents decrease. The red lines and the red dots that show the number of people who lose their life to pedestrian, those red dots are indicators of success, but they're also indicators of pain. They're also indicators that we have a long way to go. We do not want to adorn our sidewalks by the white ghost bikes to indicate that lives were lost there. We're far better than that as a city, and we must lead the entire globe. The globe has passed us. All over the globe, people have embraced safe travel, but now we have a mayor that understands the mission. No mayor has done more for pedestrian safety than this mayor, and we appreciate that. Let's continue to do so. Thank you.
Finally, the chair of the Transportation Committee in the City Council has been a key partner in all the work of Vision Zero, Councilmember Ydanis Rodriguez.
First of all, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and especially Family for Safe Streets, Amy and the rest of the team. You've been doing a great job. You know, I'm here with my daughter, and I always say that before having my 2 daughters and being the chairman of this committee, I never thought that I would be so embracing all the good cause of Family for Safe Streets and our responsibility to save our street, for save the life of pedestrians and cyclists. You know, all the good news that we heard today is the result of the great leadership that our mayor and the rest of the advocate community have shown, that it is possible to follow other cities, other nations, that they are doing still better than us, that they're saving more life. And we are continue working to reduce to zero the devil New Yorkers that they lost their life, not because God had that day chosen by them for them to leave, but yet because, you know, unfortunately, responsible drivers, they were in the street. Over the past 3 years, we've seen declines in traffic fatality under Vision Zero. Nonetheless, myself and I know the mayor, many advocates still know that we have to continue working together to identify more resources so that we can be more aggressive and continue expanding all the initiatives that we have in our city. We can make our city a walkable one. That's doable. And by making a walkable one, the life of New Yorkers will be happier than ever, and people will feel that they're safe for them to walk in the street, especially for seniors and our children. I'm proud to say that, no doubt, that this is a Mayor de Blasio, someone that will leave a legacy when it comes to Vision Zero. With a $1.6 billion investments in changing the way our streets look, work, and protect people, there's no doubt that this administration is committed to ending traffic deaths. Today is an important day, marking the start of the construction season that will end with newly designing streets to slow cars down and give pedestrians and cyclists more space. This is a time for us to continue saving lives. Pedestrians and drivers, they should know that the streets belong to everyone, that we have to share the street, but the street mainly belongs to pedestrians and cyclists. Thank you.
Before we take your questions, just want to also thank the three other organizations that have been very, very supportive of Vision Zero and are here and are part of the advocacy work to get more change in Albany. I want to thank the Riders Alliance, Bike New York, and the Regional Plan Association for all of their support. We'll take questions on Vision Zero, and then we'll take questions on other topics. Vision Zero, go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry if I missed this, but do you have a cost estimate for the possible cuts under the Trump budget?
We, as I said, the work to date on Vision Zero has gotten about $100 million in federal support. Now, Polly, I don't know if you have a specific number that will, from what we've seen so far. Come on over.
Well, I think there are a couple of areas that the president's budget singles out. One is the Tiger grants that, as the mayor said, have been a source of support for Vision Zero and other projects here in New York. The second is what's called the New Starts program, which is new capital grants. And as you've seen in the news, that potentially could affect the Gateway Tunnel, the next phase of 2nd Avenue Subway, and the bigger capital build out of our Woodhaven Boulevard Select Bus Service project.
So a dollar figure was her question. Do we have any projected dollar figure what the cuts impact would be?
Well, because these are discretionary programs. I mean, the MTA was hoping to get over a period of years $2 billion for 2nd Avenue Subway. The Gateway Tunnel, we were looking over many years to get approximately $10 billion in federal dollars. And for Woodhaven Boulevard, we were hoping to get around $97 million. Now, that doesn't mean we would have gotten it all, but that's what we were hoping to get out of those programs.
$100 million for the Tiger grants? Was that?
$100 million. Hang on one second. $100 million for all Vision Zero related work so far over the last 3 years. Tiger grants were how much combined?
Well, the city got overall around $60 million in Tiger grants, 35 in particular, on some of the projects of the type we're talking about today.
But Mara, you can hear on the bigger issues, 2nd Avenue Subway, the Gateway project, Woodhaven. These are huge potential projects and a huge potential loss to New York City. So that's why we're taking this so seriously.
On the $97 million that you were hoping for Woodhaven Boulevard, what percentage of the total cost of improvements to Woodhaven Boulevard is that? And what were you booking that in the capital budget? Like, what time period were you expecting to or hoping to get those funds in?
Right, and just to be clear, the way we're doing Woodhaven is we're going to do an operational project with city funds, and that will be going forward this year. We had hoped to do a bigger build out of a capital project, which would have put in more robust street infrastructure. We were looking for the federal government, I think, to cover around $100 million out of a $200 million plus project.
And we are going to fight for that funding still. Juliet, did you have something? No? Okay. Go ahead.
Mr. Mayor and Commissioner Scheinberg, can you go into more detail about what you're looking for from Albany this budget and who you're meeting with and what you see as the prospects for getting what we want?
Well, and I'm happy to say we've been working closely with the advocate community to refine the next piece of legislation to expand our speed camera program. As you know, Albany has authorized the city to place speed cameras at 140 schools, but there are a lot of restrictions on how we can use those cameras. They can only be used during school hours and only on a roadway that abuts an entrance to the school within a quarter mile. So we would like to see some of those restrictions lifted, have the ability to go to more schools, and even potentially the ability to look at high crash corridors instead of just focusing on schools. Because the good news is one of the good pieces of news from last year is still too many, but we only saw 3 school-age fatalities last year. Those numbers have been coming down in part because of, I think, the great work that has happened around schools. So we want to focus again on high crash corridors. I'll also be up in Albany talking about design build, an unrelated topic, but something that would actually help the city speed some of this big capital work, enable us to do it much faster and at a lower cost.
Who are you meeting with?
Well, we can give you the list of who we're meeting with.
But let me just amplify. Look, the speed cameras have worked. There's no question the speed cameras have worked. They're a crucial part of our arsenal, and we need much more freedom to put them in so we can save lives. It's as simple as that. And, you know, this is going to be an important discussion in Albany, and I think that the leaders in Albany, when they look in the faces of the family members, are going to be held accountable. We need them to step up for safety. It's worked. We have years now of evidence that this has saved lives, but we have to go farther. Yeah.
Mayor, what's your plan to respond to people in Albany and perhaps elsewhere who will say that the speed cameras are just a way for the city to increase its revenue?
You know, here's the point. If people don't speed, we don't get revenue, and we would be happy not to have that revenue. This is not something we're doing for revenue. We would be thrilled if no one sped and there was no revenue. And the sad reality is that sanctions are one of the things that changes behavior. The same with the NYPD pulling someone over and giving them a ticket. But we're saving lives. I mean, there's nothing more important than saving lives. And if speed cameras are one of the ways we save lives, then we need to double down on that strategy. It's as simple as that.
Just going back to the cuts that could come from President Trump, can you give us a sense of like how many projects or what kind of projects that money translates to? A regular person who doesn't maybe know what $100 million over 2 years, 3 years, like how many crosswalks or what's in danger?
I mean, again, as we've mentioned, the Tiger program has funded some of our smaller street reconstruction and Vision Zero projects, and then the New Starts is the transit capital grants, which have funded much bigger projects in the city, like Second Avenue, like East Side Access.
Describe some of those.
You know, so like we're looking at today, street reconstruction, school safety projects, you know, projects that are in a smaller price tag, Fordham Plaza up in the Bronx, those types of projects. In the 10, 15, Tiger is more like a 10, $15 million range for projects. 25 is what we got for Vision Zero. New Starts can be tens, if not hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars.
Flow zones, things around schools, which we're trying to be able to describe.
Right, exactly, yes. School safety improvements, putting in neck downs and better signals, et cetera. Yes, all the work we do around schools.
And look, one of the things that's been most popular has been having the traffic islands that break up someone's journey across the street. And that's the kind of thing that is paid for, so that all pedestrians would like to not have to be out in the middle of the street so long, crossing the street when they have the walk signal. Our senior citizens have been particularly concerned about that. So when we can reduce that distance, that is one of the best things we can do for safety. And these are the kinds of grants that allow us to do many more of them and make a lot more people safe. Yeah.
A lot of these projects, especially bike lanes, have buffered lanes. What is the city doing to protect cyclists from cars blocking bike lanes, and where does that rank on priorities of Vision Zero?
I'll start, and Chief, you want to come over? Look, the bottom line is cars are not supposed to block bike lanes, and certainly not for a prolonged period of time, so that's where we're particularly sensitive, things like delivery trucks that might. So NYPD has a mandate to look out for any situation, particularly if a vehicle staying there for any amount of time.
That's one of the summonses that we encourage our traffic agents to issue. And this year, we issued 15,497 summonses for people who are blocking bike lanes and vehicles. And that's a 23% increase from last year. So we are going to continue. Our police officers and our traffic enforcement agents are trying to make it as safe as possible for our bicycling public. Year to date, 15,497, which is a 23% increase from last year.
Year to date meaning today, this date today versus, right, as of Sunday versus the same date last year.
Yeah. Was the city going to explore maybe overhauling its delivery hours, things like that? Is that something that the city's considering?
The Transportation Commissioner with a lot of our colleagues is looking at the congestion issue. I've spoken about that several times, that we are looking forward in the coming weeks to present a new plan. And that's certainly going to be one of the issues we have to consider, is how we handle deliveries in the city. But we have not come to a final plan, but you'll be hearing more in the next few weeks.
What about enforcement regarding bicyclists when they run the red lights, when they go the wrong way, and they're interfering with traffic or pedestrians in that regard?
Look, bikes are supposed to follow the same laws as vehicles. When they don't, it can be dangerous. And yes, there is enforcement. Chief, you want to speak to that?
Summonses are you issuing for that?
One of the areas that we certainly want to make sure is our bicyclists are following the rules and regulations, and they are required to follow all the regulations a motor vehicle is to follow. We've had more summonses issued. I don't have the numbers in front of us, but I will get you the numbers, the year-to-date number of bike summonses that NYPD has issued. And that's going to be an area that we're going to be working on. We also encourage our bicyclists out there, especially the ones who are not necessarily the recreational riders, but the ones who are riding to and from work each and every day, that after sunset, it's dark out, they're more difficult to see. And that's one of the major things that I hear, that when the motorists, when I read the police accident report, it says that they didn't see the bicyclists. And if it's at 9 o'clock at night, 8 o'clock at night, they are difficult to see. So by having that headlight and tail light, they are, in fact, helping and to protect themselves, because that makes them more visible. So that's very important. So again, it's an education process. We know that DOT and the NYPD has been passing out flyers. We encourage them to do so. We've had out campaigns, and we'll continue to do that as probably in April. We'll start again with the education, and then again, we've been doing enforcement from the beginning of the year.
So on the topic of capital projects,
Try again.
On the topic of capital projects, advocates for transportation alternatives and families for safe streets were at City Hall last week asking council members to sign on to a letter asking your administration to redirect funding from those capital projects, which cost time and money, towards low-cost operational projects, and also towards just sort of when streets are repaved, ensuring that when they're repaved they include curb extensions and bike lanes if they fit. Is that something that the city would look into, either as a matter of policy generally, or as a matter of policy in response to the federal funds, in order to ensure that the pace of Vision Zero isn't affected?
I'm gonna say what I said at the start of this event, which is I want to thank the mayor. We essentially have the resources we need to do operational projects, and I think you've seen, David, the pace. I think we're up to, I think it's 212 or 232 over the past few years. And when you look at the list we have here, I think we're doing some extraordinary projects. So I think I cannot complain, Mr. Mayor. We have the resources we need. It's a good question about the capital projects, and it's interesting because obviously we have some big ones coming, our Great Streets projects that we're very excited about, but we will have to obviously keep an eye on the federal picture. We have gotten federal funds to do some of that work, and look, I'm hoping that, as the mayor says, this budget is the start of a long debate, and we'll see where it winds up.
Operational projects be used to offset the impact of the cuts to the capital projects?
Oh, wait. I appreciate the question, very fair question. I want to reiterate the basic principle. We're not taking the cuts as a fait accompli. We're just not. These kind of cuts are going to be very, very unpopular all over the country, in not just blue states, but red states and purple states as well. So there are months and months ahead, and I think when you think of all the kinds of things that people do not like taken away from them, the things that make them safer and make their streets better, the things that affect senior citizens, I mean, these are a lot of hot buttons. So we're going to fight with colleagues around the country. I am not assuming these cuts. Right now, the part of your question about the operational versus the larger capital, I think we have to do both, and the resources are there to do both.
Right. It's not that I need more money to do operational projects and I can take them from capital projects. I've got the funds I need for operational projects. As you know, I think the question is how quickly can we work them through the community, have our planners and experts get them going. And again, I'm proud of the pace. I think New York City DOT, and we have some of our great leaders from the agency here, we are doing projects at a pace that is pretty unprecedented.
With the back first, then we'll come to you. Go ahead.
Chief Chen, can you give us the specific steps the NYPD is taking to discourage police vehicles from blocking bike lanes?
Part of it is that we've At my forum at TrafficStat, we bring the boroughs and the individual precincts who are present, and we actually show the photo of the department vehicles that are in those bike lanes, and we encourage our officers not to park their vehicles in those particular lanes. There are going to be occasions where it may very well be an emergency, but that's certainly, we've actually had information forwarded to us, and we asked our precinct commanders to survey their own commands where they may have bike lanes and where the vehicles are parking and causing a problem issue there. But again, it's something that we will continue to work on those in terms of vehicles, any type of vehicles in those bike lanes.
Sanctions for officers who park there outside of an emergency?
We have the option as the precinct commanders. We see that as discretion to issue command disciplines to the particular officers, which is basically where they could be penalized, they lose time and things of that nature. Quite often they will warn them initially, but what happened is that there come a point when warnings, and we're going to take action against those officers, the same thing as we do the actions against the public. So again, we won't expect our officers to honor those bike lanes also.
Highland Boulevard has been called the new Boulevard of Death. I'm just curious if you guys are planning any major infrastructure improvements on Highland at any point?
I'm going to pull out my list here. Which is blowing in the wind. All right, sorry. You know, Highland Boulevard, of course, has been a challenge, and actually Chief Chan and I stood out there, I think now 2 years ago, after there had been a terrible spate of fatalities. We handed out flyers. I know NYPD stepped up their enforcement, and DOT went in and did some improvements in terms of signal timing and fencing, and we've actually, I'm happy to say, we have seen a big decrease now last year on Highland Boulevard. We are going to be taking a look at it again, and we're going to be doing some other great projects in Staten Island this year. We're going to be, for the first time ever on Greeley Avenue, building out basically what we would call traffic circles, because that's long been a speedway, as you know, where residents have had a lot of concern, and I think we've come up with an innovative solution. We're going to be doing a project that I'm very excited about, Van Duzer Bike Lane, which is going to be a great connection to the ferry, and we're going to be working on some cycling and pedestrian improvements around the ferry terminal.
Why not, like, do a big infrastructure improvement on Highland? Like, is it just like the thought that the signal changes are good enough, or?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, it's a very, very challenging roadway, and a roadway to do a whole lot of big work on it. I mean, honestly, it's been pretty controversial. It's obviously one of the most congested, heavily used roadways in Staten Island. But again, I think we did some enforcement education and timing and fencing, and we actually saw a pretty dramatic improvement on Highland Boulevard.
And let me just add, we don't accept the notion of any street being a quote-unquote boulevard of death. We didn't accept it with Queens Boulevard. We won't accept it with Highland. We won't accept it with any street in this city. Part of the solution is increased enforcement. So you will see a lot of enforcement there, and we'll keep making the physical changes we need to. But we're not going to, if we see a street that's a persistent problem, we'll keep adding to the equation until we get it to be as safe as it possibly can be. Yeah.
Can you talk about how you plan to drive down hit and runs, which were up in 2016? And then Chief Chan, if you have the stats of the incidents and arrests year to date.
Look, I think it's all part of the overall structure of things. In other words, more enforcement and more sense of consequence has an impact. And obviously the checkpoints, since unfortunately a number of hit and runs are related to driving under the influence, the checkpoints are a very effective tool. People know that checkpoints are going to be used regularly. It discourages that kind of behavior.
That's definitely an area that the NYPD is working on. Our CIS team and our officers are looking at these collisions involving people who are injured and things of that nature. One of the things that we're also in the process of is to gather more information, working with vehicle repair places that also replace windshields and things of that nature. We're in the process of developing a plan and getting cooperation from these businesses when we are looking for a particular type of vehicle with a certain type of damage or perhaps a certain color. Then we will get that information out to to these groups out there, and hopefully they will be able to share and get back to us with information. Because again, when we have a vehicle that leaves the scene, we're going to be looking for it throughout the whole area. But again, it's much easier that we either get an email out to these businesses so they can cooperate, and there's also, we'll talk about if there's a reward and things of that nature. So again, we seek the public's cooperation, but again, that's one of the initiatives that we're following up on this year.
And just one other point, I would argue this is another case for why we need additional help from Albany on the speed cameras, because I think the atmosphere of consequence, and look, I wish we could tell people don't do bad things and they just stop doing bad things. But I know consequences have a major effect on human behavior. And the speed cameras have been another one of those really important tools in changing behavior. So I want anyone who's driving to know that they have to be responsible for all of their behavior every hour of the day. And the speed cameras are another way that we send that message very clearly. Please.
Have you also talked to Albany about maybe increasing the fines of hit and runs?
Increasing the fines. Do you know? Do one of you know we've had that conversation?
They have it.
Come on.
There currently is additional penalties for leaving the scene. But what happened is that ultimately, leaving the scene, the arrest, I think, sends the strongest message. Now, one of the things also I want to indicate is that we've increased our DWI enforcement and also our 511, where we have individuals who are suspended licenses, because we feel that those are the people, if they're going to be intoxicated or their license is suspended, then they're more than likely to leave the scene of a collision where they cause injuries and things of that nature, because they know they're going to be arrested because of DWI, their drinking or drugs and things of that nature. So again, we continue to increase our enforcement in those targeted areas also.
Okay, yes.
There was a bill introduced this week to raise the speed limit on Ocean Parkway, and obviously if that passes, it could lead to raising the speed limit on a number of other city streets. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a mistake. I think it would make people less safe. And we're going to fight against any measure that would make New Yorkers less safe. It's as simple as that. Look, let's be clear. This is the default speed limit around the city that we've decreased. Obviously, some streets have specific speed limits that are different. Since we changed the speed limit, the number of deaths went down. It's as simple as that, 3 years in a row. So, of course, we're not going to increase the speed limit again. And anyone who wants to increase the speed limit is taking a real risk with the lives of New Yorkers. We're not going to do that. Yeah.
Back to design build for a second. What's your impression of what's standing in the way in Albany? There's talk that there's union interests that are pushing back against expanding into the city. Is that your impression?
Well, I think it's a pretty complicated story. I think here in the city, we've actually had great consensus. We've been working with the major business groups and construction groups, the building trades, and DC 37. I think there's consensus locally here in the city about how we would handle design build. We'd have good labor protections. We'd have a robust program from EBWBEs. I think some of those disputes actually involve our upstate, our sister cities in upstate and how things would be handled there. But here in the city, I think we have good consensus. I just wanted to add on the question of Ocean Parkway that Danielle asked about, because look, it is a very challenging roadway. It is one obviously that carries a lot of through traffic through Brooklyn, but it's also a roadway with so many pedestrians and cyclists and families crossing it. It has actually one of the highest crash and fatality rates in Brooklyn, and so we feel very strongly that those safety improvements are important, and we have seen since we lowered the speed limit. And we put in speed cameras. We put them, by the way, near 2 schools with a lot of students. We've already seen a reduction in crashes and injuries there. So we really think the strategy is working on Ocean Parkway.
And one more point on design build for everyone who wants to see us rightfully achieve more of these good capital projects more quickly that'll make people safe. We need your help getting design build done. It's going to literally free up a lot of money because things will be done a lot more efficiently. It'll free up a lot of money. We'll be able to cover a lot more ground. It just makes sense for everyone. Okay, going to last call on Vision Zero related questions. Going once, twice. Is that a Vision Zero related question? Huh? Go ahead.
Commissioner, do you have a target number of speed cameras? You're at 140 now. How many would you want?
Sorry, Andrew, I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
Do you have a target? I will translate.
Oh.
Do you have a target number of speed cameras you're shooting for? He said you're at 140 now. How many do you want?
I think we're still finalizing on the number we're going to ask for, but I want to emphasize, as important as the number is to ability to have deploy the speed cameras wildly. Right now, as I mentioned, we can only deploy them during school hours on the streets that abut the school entrances. And the example I like to give, I stood with the mayor on Northern Boulevard where the boy Nushat Nayan was killed. I can't put a speed camera on that part of Northern Boulevard because it doesn't actually abut the school. And in fact, as we've seen, we did an analysis of the past 5 years, noisy, and we saw that about 85% of the fatalities and serious injuries happened in times and places where we can't use speed cameras. So even just lifting those restrictions would be tremendously important. And then obviously we'd like to grow the number, but I think we're still finalizing what our request is going to be. We're at 140 locations, so we're allowed to put multiple cameras at one location. And we have about 100 that are fixed, and then 40 we do mobile, so we try and get to every school in the city.
Okay, going Vision Zero one more time. Going once, twice. Okay, other topics. Michael.
Two Republican congressmen have proposed that the state pick up Medicaid costs for localities. New York City's not included in that. Would you like to see the city included in that proposal?
Now that proposal, you're talking about the quote-unquote Collins Amendment, I take it? It's very dangerous for all of New York State, and certainly for New York City as well. It would lead to a massive cutback in support for our hospitals and for healthcare overall. It would fundamentally disrupt how healthcare is provided in New York State, and that would include New York City. So this is the repeal of the Affordable Care Act. As you know, there's almost 2 million people in New York City who got insurance under the Affordable Care Act. That would be horribly negative to have the repeal alone. But this amendment would add insult to injury because it would fundamentally undermine our hospitals, meaning our voluntary hospitals as well as our public hospitals. It would decrease the amount of funding available. It would probably lead to huge cutbacks in hospital services. And it's very dangerous for every part of the state. Anna?
There's always been some doubt about the number of homeless people in the shelter system from Staten Island, and the borough president has even expressed some skepticism about this number to you, I'm told, last week. I was wondering if you could address that skepticism and that doubt.
We're going to be very transparent with the borough president. I think it's a perfectly fair question. The system that we have is based on the last known permanent address. And I've directed our Social Services Commissioner, Steve Banks, to sit down with the borough president and review how it's done so he can see for himself how we keep track of people and which borough they're from.
Public advocate Tish James recently called for the Fearless Girl statue near the Bull to be made permanent. And I wanted to get your thoughts on whether you think that should be a permanent part of New York.
Well, first I want to say a compliment for Tish James because back in 2008, when we were fighting Mayor Bloomberg on his term limits proposal, you were a fearless girl. And you're still fearless. We're certainly going to look at the potential of prolonging the fearless girl's presence there. You know, some people have called for permanent action. We're hesitant to do anything permanent because, that has ramifications for the whole city. But in terms of a longer presence, I'm open to that, and we're going to be looking at that.
Kind of response to it?
Oh, yeah, outstanding response. I understand, for a lot of people, it's a fantastically powerful symbol, and certainly for a lot of young women, a lot of girls as well. So, yeah, we're going to see what we can do to prolong the presence.
Mr. Mayor, returning to the Manhattan DA's letter to the Board of Elections, the State Board of Elections, when you were responding to that, you sort of grouped together legal and ethical and appropriate all together. What the letter says is that they didn't find anything for illegal to base criminal charges on, but there were things that were inappropriate. And you grouped those together saying that the results showed nothing inappropriate. Have you rethought that at all?
No, I've said what I believe, and I feel the same thing I felt last week. Marcia.
Well, Mr. Mayor, there's going to be a new candidate who's entering the race this afternoon to run against you. Bo Dietl, you've probably heard of him. Number one, I want to know how you feel about him entering the race. But number two, he is asking that an independent counsel be appointed acceptable for what he's calling questionable election financing? Your response to that?
Marcia, I don't know him. I've met him, but I don't know him. The fact is, there have obviously been extensive investigations, and they've come to a clear conclusion, and everything we did was appropriate and legal, and I think the case is closed.
You think he's trying to...
It never surprises me when a candidate's trying to get attention.
Think Progress has obtained what they say is Daniel Pantaleo's disciplinary records from before the Eric Garner incident, and it shows a number of things. He had 7 disciplinary complaints and 14 individual allegations lodged against him before the Garner incident. 4 of the allegations were substantiated by an independent review board. For one of them, he was docked only the 2 vacation days instead of 8 for an unauthorized stop and frisk. The report also says that his had more than the average number of complaints filed against him. I'm just curious, what do you think of this report, this officer? Does he deserve to remain an NYPD officer?
Again, I have not seen that. Eric just told me a few moments ago that information had been leaked. Haven't seen it. I'd have to see it before I could comment on it.
Hearing that he has the higher
Again, I'm not going to do anything on theory. I have to see it before I can comment on it. I thought you had yours. Okay, well, yep.
Just 2 questions, please. Recent rise in bias crimes on the subways, and also your take on yesterday's testimony by Director Comey on the alleged wiretapping and the Russian involvement in the election.
Look, I think Director Comey has been very straightforward that there needs to be a full investigation of Russian involvement in the election. It seems to me that with every passing month, there's more and more evidence the Russians were involved, and it could have changed the course of the election. And I can't remember anything in my lifetime like this. I can't remember any situation where a foreign government went to such extent to affect the outcome of an election, and there was so much evidence of it. So I'm very happy to hear that the FBI is going to fully investigate it. And obviously on the other charges made by President Trump, you know, there's been no evidence of that, and no one, including the president, has come forward with any evidence. So I think that's going to be put to bed. But the Russian matter is going to, you know, cast a very long shadow over the future of our democratic process, because until we get to the bottom of it, we don't know what's going to happen in the next election. On the bias crime question, what was your question?
Bias crimes on the subways.
Well, look, it's not just on the subways. We've seen a rise in bias crime since the election. And again, 3 categories, and they're all troubling. Anti-Semitic incidents, anti-Muslim incidents, and anti-LGBT incidents. There's no question this sudden increase in bias incidents is directly related to the hateful rhetoric we heard during the election season. And we're trying to do everything we can to show that those who commit acts of hate will suffer the consequences. The NYPD has been very aggressive on this front. But we need more and more voices of tolerance to come forward all over the country if we're going to, you know, stop this trend. Because as I've said before, the forces of hate have been unleashed, and they think they have license to do these things. We have to show them they don't. Yeah.
Separate from the leak, have you as mayor reviewed Daniel Pantaleo's disciplinary file?
No. Yeah.
Is there enough sense of urgency from the administration on all of these allegations surrounding the Eric Garner case? The family has been waiting for years for a DOJ investigation, then for the records. Now the records are leaked. Are you doing enough to give the family the answers?
You know that the DOJ decision, which, as you know, took a long, long time, is what has held us from taking our own actions. You know that. And we have been asked consistently by the Justice Department to defer to their approach. That causes a lot of delay. We don't know yet what's going to come of the Justice Department's action, but let's say they decide to bring charges. That will lead to a trial that could go on for another year or 2, and that's certainly what we've seen in the past. So it's very painful for everyone involved that these things stretch out so long. And, you know, we're certainly going to look and see if there's any way to do things differently in the future. But now the bottom line is That's what is affecting the situation, and we simply have to let the Justice Department come to its decision. Other questions? Yeah.
In the course of the investigations, at any point did you submit written answers to questions?
Written answers? I don't recall any written answers. Again, I don't recall any written answers.
Mayor, Governor Cuomo has twice criticized you on the issue of Rikers Island in the last couple of weeks. One saying there was political impetus not to take it on, and then more recently saying that Ward's Island would be an acceptable potential new location for if Rikers were to be closed. I wanted to see if you could respond.
Look, we, for 3 years now, have been fundamentally changing the reality on Rikers Island. You've all reported on it. We ended solitary confinement. This was one of the worst parts of the history of Rikers Island that went on for a long time. Solitary confinement, including of minors. We ended that. We have put in place a whole series of reforms in how correction officers are recruited and trained. We've added a huge number of officers for the safety of all. We've added security cameras. I could go on for quite a while. Let's be blunt. For years and years, no one in authority dealt with the crisis on Rikers Island. In the last 3 years, we have taken it on squarely. We've never shirked from it. We know it's our responsibility, but let's be clear. Rikers Island is the responsibility of the City of New York to resolve. I've said that we're going to have updates for you very soon, leading up to the executive budget process. Our job is to address this crisis. We've been doing it for 3 straight years. We'll be doing a lot more going forward. The state's job is to take care of the state prison system. It's as simple as that.
On the budget, I know that you vowed to fight all the federal cuts, but I wonder how you could do your own budget, which is due this summer, when you're going to still wait until October to find out what the federal government is going to do. Will you have to, put money in reserve and do a massive budget mod in November? I mean, what do you do?
Yeah, Marcia, I think, first of all, believe me that the fight over this budget is going to be like nothing you've ever seen before. Some of the things that are being cut, these infrastructure projects, there's going to be a huge negative response from cities and towns all over the country on that. We mentioned the community development block grants that provide for services for seniors, provide for affordable housing, provide for home repairs. You're going to see a real pushback all over the country on this. So I think it's fair to say that President Trump has put forward a budget that will cut things that even his fellow Republican presidents didn't try and cut, and that have real strong support locally all over the country. I think it's going to be a chance to get a lot of these things back. In the meantime, as you know, we have unprecedented reserves. We have the biggest reserves the city's ever had. We intend to continue that. You're right. In October, we'll know the final federal budget. In November, we always do a budget modification each year. God forbid there are major cuts. That's the opportunity to address them. But the two-part strategy: one, fight like hell to stop the cuts; two, keep really big reserves just in case. Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, you announced a new nomination for the FTA board yesterday. Are you confident that the Senate will approve your nomination? And did you ever get an answer as to why your last pick, Councilman Udonis Rodriguez, wasn't confirmed?
Look, I never got a good enough answer, in my humble opinion. I think the councilman would have been great, but obviously there was not a will on the part of the Senate to approve him. The new nomination of Carl Weisbrod, I mean, Carl is one of the most respected people in civic life in this city, who, just a legend. I mean, with the impact he had on Times Square, on Lower Manhattan after 9/11, the tennis stadium. I mean, I'm certain that this is one that should go beyond partisanship, and I think the members of the Senate in Albany will see that Carl Weisbrod is someone who could contribute a lot on the MTA board.
Last two questions, Mr. Mayor. You said you're revisiting Vincent Pay. Chancellor Farina is testifying today at the City Council that the DOE is still not finished with their review of yeshivas. Has the Hasidic Jewish community been getting special treatment because of it's a powerful voting bloc?
No, and that's the whole point. The concern was raised about the quality of the education programs. There's a full review going on, and it's an objective review. And wherever that leads us, we're going to go forward publicly with it. But it's a complicated task to really understand what's going on in a wide variety of schools and how to make sure they're fitting the standard we need. the same on every other issue. I think we've been clear. We're going to call them as we see them. So on the review on the circumcision issue, we're going to finish that in the near term and come forward with a sense of what has transpired and how we want to handle it going forward. But no, I think, I hearken back to the pre-K situation, where some folks in the Jewish community didn't like the design we put forward, and we said this is a design that is right for everyone, and we can make it work for every kind of community, but the rules are the rules. Ultimately, a lot of yeshivas found that it was a program they could work with once they understood that we were not bending on those rules, and we ended up in a good place. Yeah.
Can you tell us what, if anything, you plan to do about the tenant interim lease program? I guess it has a new name, Affordable Neighborhood Cooperative. I guess it's kind of a hot mess or something, not technical terms.
Is that what I was going to say? That's a housing term. I think you're talking about there's a specific group of buildings where there's been a long-standing problem. Is that what you're referring to?
That is what I'm referring to.
Okay, the affordable home ownership program and the delays in getting the rehabilitation done, correct? So the answer is I'm astounded like you are how long this has gone on, but it's going on for many, many years predating us. Most of those tenants will be back in their buildings this year, and the remainder will be back in next year. And there's also been a question about whether they have their access to their belongings in storage. In the meantime, the answer is yes, they do. Rich, go ahead.
So, Mr. Mayor, back to the FBI probe. If it does turn out that there is significant Russian involvement that had some profound effect on the election, what do you think the dimensions of the fallout of that could be? Where do you think we go?
Look, that's beyond Watergate. I think that's the simplest way to say it. I've often said to you guys, I watched the entire summer of the Watergate hearings, and it, deeply affected my life. And for all of us, coming to see that a president had committed a criminal act, was devastating. But the idea of a foreign country changing the course of our elections, that's even more. That suggests our whole democracy's been undermined. So, I can't prejudge. No one should prejudge. We need a full and independent investigation. But if it turns out that Russia successfully altered the course of an election, there's been nothing like that in our history, and I think there'll be massive fallout. Thanks, everyone.